Well, thank you very much, Senator Collins, for sitting down and giving us some of your time for this interview for what we obviously think is an important subject.
As do I, and thank you so much for the excellent reporting, investigative work that you've done on this issue.
So I guess the first place I want to start is kind of zooming out in the I guess in a geopolitical sense. Where do you put America versus China in the context of global conflicts that the U.S. is involved in?
I have talked to countless defense experts, as well as the combatant commanders for the Indo Pacific region. And to a person, they tell me that this is the most dangerous global environment that the United States has faced in many years. They always list China as the number one threat. And indeed, one of the combatant commanders is convinced that China will try to seize Taiwan soon, within the next 5 years, for example. That's one person's estimate, but there's no doubt, as Secretary of Defense Austin has told us, that China is the pacing threat that we face.
I think whenever you talk about China, there's a kind of a thought system that people bring up called Thusidities Trap, where there's a rising power and a declining power, and inevitably it brings about war. Do you think there's a way out of Thusidities Trap when it comes to U.S. versus China?
I do, and I think it involves working with our allies, such as the work we're doing with the Australians to strengthen their submarine industrial base. And it also involves our recognizing that China's Navy is growing far faster than ours. I recently reviewed the U.S. Navy's shipbuilding report. We now have fewer than 300 ships in our fleet, and it is going to take till 2054, 30 years, before we have close to 400 in our fleet. You know what China's doing? China is going to reach the 400 number in 2 years, 2 versus our 30. And there's a reason that China's increasing the size of our fleet. And we've seen what China's doing in the South China Sea. It's menacing exercises towards the Philippines as well as Taiwan. So I think that the threat is a real one.
So I guess closer to home in Maine, the reason we're doing this interview is because of the presence of Asian transnational criminal organizations that are taking advantage of rural Maine. And we see a lot of these sites are co-located near, for example, the National Guard base outside of Woodville, the U.S. Army Reserve base in Dexter, another Army Reserve location in Auburn. Outside of Greenbush, there's an Air Force base out there. There's plenty of these sites in Greenbush. Are you concerned at all about the proximity of these criminal organizations and their drug trafficking hubs to military bases?
I'm very concerned because it's part of a larger pattern of the Chinese buying farmland in the Midwest, for example, that is strategically located near our military installations. We also should remember the Chinese surveillance balloon, which the Biden administration was extremely slow in reacting to, and it was traveling over sensitive military sites and undoubtedly gathering information and transmitting it back to China. The other comment that I would make is based on my years on the Intelligence Committee, it's very difficult for me to believe that China is not aware of what its transnational criminal organizations are doing.
When you see wire transfers back to Hong Kong, it seems like it's hard to believe that they're not at least giving it a tacit blessing.
Absolutely.
So I guess when I talk about this, I get criticism for saying, the Chinese are operating these drug trafficking cartels, but you seem to be able to say the Chinese are buying farmland. The main media, some people in the state have been very hesitant to name the problem as criminal organizations connected to the People's Republic of China, blessed by the Communist Party of China. Why do you think that is?
It puzzles me, frankly. I don't know whether it's because the Biden administration has decided to downgrade marijuana, reclassify it if it can, and doesn't want to interfere with state laws such as Maine, where marijuana is legalized. That's one theory that I have. The problem with that theory is it ignores both the public health threat that these Chinese grows pose to the people of our country, and it ignores the national security threat. I have found of the briefings I've had that the Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA, has been the most far-reaching and realistic. And after all, they have the most expertise.
Well, I will say the law enforcement sources I've talked with have said that your advocacy on this is what has really spurred federal involvement. So I thank you for that as someone who doesn't want them showing up at my house. When I visit some of these properties based on tips from law enforcement or power company employees or just main wire readers, one of the first things I do is go and talk with neighbors to the property, because they're oftentimes your best sources, your best witnesses, and they've seen what's going on. And I have to say, the people of rural Maine are terrified. They are terrified, especially now that they know that they're dealing with a criminal organization rather than just some plucky, people from New York who moved up and decided to bend the law. So what more do you think that local, state, federal law enforcement could be doing to protect the Maine way of life, which seems to be being exploited by criminal organizations?
We need an all-hands-on-deck approach to this problem, and it is a serious problem. I, too, have talked to neighbors of these houses, and first of all, they don't want a drug organization operating right down the road from them. And second, they do know that these are criminals. They're breaking the law. And third, the fact that it has this link to transnational criminal organizations connected to China is frightening. Why are the Chinese doing this is a question that I keep getting. There's also a practical aspect of this. These growing operations in these homes are destroying these houses.
Absolutely.
They are full of black mold. They are extremely dangerous to one's health, and they will never be usable as houses again at a time when our state has a severe shortage of affordable housing.
Yeah, fewer than any time in my lifetime.
Same with me. So I think that that's part of it as well. Ironically, I first learned about this problem 2 years ago when a former staffer of mine who lives in Winterport called to tell me about a house down the road that mysteriously had burned down.
169 Baker Road.
There you go. You really do know. And it was due to illegal overuse of the wiring that was in the house.
It's very obvious when you look at the house.
And that's when I first heard of it. And then I thought, well, maybe it's a one-of, maybe it's an isolated incident. So I first wrote to the head of Maine's Drug Enforcement Agency, and I haven't been able to find a response to that letter. It's possible we missed it, but then I started bringing it up to federal officials, and I've continued to pressure federal officials, including the Attorney General, the head of DEA, who was the most cooperative, the Secretary of State, the head of the FBI. I have raised it at public hearings over and over again. That's how serious I think this problem is.
So I guess I want to talk about both the initial letter that you sent to MDEA and the more recent congressional hearings. Well, it appears to me, having followed this fairly closely, that the Maine State Police and the Maine Drug Enforcement Agency have been not involved a lot in this. There's 3 search warrants that have been executed that I think the Maine State Police were involved in. It seems kind of strange, you being the first person to put this on the radar with a letter to the Maine Drug Enforcement Agency, that the state-level law enforcement best suited to deal with a problem that overlaps multiple jurisdictions has seemingly no interest in this organized crime problem.
The sheriffs in the state have clearly taken the lead, and I give them enormous credit because they have taken this very seriously. But as one of the sheriffs said to me recently when I called him, they just don't have the resources. Yeah. And he pointed out another point, and that is they don't have the analysts and the analytic capability to be able to map this out and figure out all the connections. And that's why I think it's important for federal and state law enforcement to be involved also. It's mainly been an effort led by our sheriffs and local law enforcement, and they have limited resources, and they need help. And given the connection to China, I think the federal government needs to step up. And as I said, it's a question that I've asked virtually every federal official who has any jurisdiction and comes before the Appropriations Committee.
And you asked FBI Director Chris Wray about this, and I guess, do you think that in a private setting he might be more forthcoming with you?
I do. My next step is to try to get an intelligence briefing in closed session about this problem, because first of all, I'm wondering what exactly are the Chinese doing? Is this an attempt to put more money into the production of fentanyl? That's one theory, that it's sort of an elaborate money laundering scheme. And as you know, China's the source of the predecessor criminals for fentanyl, as well as the printing presses for the pills, and provides both to Mexican cartels that then smuggle the fentanyl into our country. And everyone's aware of the tremendous toll that fentanyl has taken in our state and states throughout the country, but particularly rural states, I've noticed, have been disproportionately affected. So that may be part of it. Although the U.S. Attorney in Maine has told me that she's seen no evidence of human trafficking, I still believe there's some sort of human trafficking or forced labor involved. Who would voluntarily work in a house that is covered with black mold and is extremely unhealthy, using who knows what kind of pesticides? And when you can make a very reasonable salary on the outside now, given the workforce shortages in our state. And third, I'm concerned that this could be part of a plot by China to try to increase addiction rates in our country and undermine us from within. I know that to some people that sounds way out there.
Not to me.
But I truly think that's part of an overall strategy. And finally, as we've talked about, I think it's part of intelligence gathering by the Chinese.
So I guess there's a couple of angles to explore there. The first is we saw earlier this week I guess the indictment out of California that revealed a sophisticated money laundering operation between the Sinaloa cartel and the Chinese money launderers. They seem to have this kind of uneasy partnership when it comes to drug trafficking, and none of it's in America's best interest. But have you, in your conversations, seen any evidence of this kind of a partnership operating in Maine?
I don't have any concrete evidence. I just have suspicions and that are grounded in many years of intelligence briefings and my work on the Appropriations Committee as well as the Intelligence Committee. That's why my next step, and I've already had one conversation with the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, is to request that the committee get a briefing on what public officials can't say to me in public hearings.
It did seem like Director Fry's answer was affirming your suspicions, but not wanting to give a sound cut that the Maine Wire could use. This issue is, I think, bound up with immigration and the exploitation of our asylum system. I think the problem really began in late 2019, 2020. That's when you saw the property purchases really spin up. At that same time, the level of Chinese nationals encountered at the southern border skyrocketed. And I don't think it's a coincidence. There's a lot of people that don't think it's a coincidence. So I guess what can we do from an immigration perspective to, I guess, crack down on the southern border, but also fix our asylum system? Because we've already seen one case of a guy in South China, Maine, who was busted operating an illegal marijuana grow, admitted to coming into the country illegally, then later claimed asylum. And when he was being moved to an ICE facility in Cumberland County to be deported, they actually changed his bail so that they could bring him back to Kennebec County and keep him in the state.
So there's no doubt that our asylum system is being abused and it's overwhelmed. There are certainly people coming to this country legitimately seeking asylum, but they should be crossing through legitimate ports of entry and claiming asylum. But our asylum system is so overwhelmed that it has years of backlogs of these cases before an immigration judge hears the case and makes a decision. And in the meantime, individuals are being paroled into the country, and there's very little tracking of where they are. Many of them do not show up for their immigration hearing. I am a strong proponent of legal immigration. And I know that, for example, healthcare workers from other countries would be very welcomed in many parts of this of our state and country. And so I don't want to give the impression that I'm against legal immigration, but that's not what we're seeing at the southern border. And I've been to the southern border twice. And I remember going in the Obama administration and the Secretary of Homeland Security saying that they were overwhelmed and they started doing deportation flights immediately. The numbers back then are tiny compared to the numbers today. And the last number that I saw, it was over 120,000 Chinese nationals had crossed the border. Now think about this. Those are the ones we know about.
The encounters, yes. Yeah.
Those are the encounters with Border Patrol agents or ICE agents. That doesn't count what they call the gotaways, those who don't turn themselves in and who are likely to be the more dangerous individuals. So the other threat I'm very worried about is a terrorist attack. We have seen the terrorist group ISIS-K act as a travel facilitator for people coming into the country. And the FBI just arrested 8 of them recently from, I believe, Tajikistan. And why are they here? I do not believe that they are here to start a good new life in America. Their travel is arranged by a terrorist group. And the fact that the FBI has arrested them is an issue. Last November, around Thanksgiving, we had 20 Romanians come in through near the Holton, Maine.
They charged the border.
It was unbelievable. And several of them were on the list of transnational criminal organizations. But the rest of them were paroled
right into
the country.
Yeah.
This makes no sense whatsoever. President Biden is very belatedly starting to crack down on some of this. But I'll tell you, if you talk to the Border Patrol agents and the head of their union, who, by the way, lived in Caribou, my hometown, for a while, and lived across the street from one of my brothers. So he was with me my trip to the southern border and was very frank in talking about what they are seeing. So I think that is an entryway not only of people who are seeking a better life, but people who would do us harm, terrorists, drug dealers, and fentanyl.
So I guess what more can be done at the state level? Because you talk about the Romanians who come in or any of the illegal aliens who are just immediately paroled. We also see on the rare occasions when somebody is present at a search warrant being executed at a Chinese mafia grow, they oftentimes will get $1,000 bail or $5,000 bail. And what we see time and time again is within 24 hours, somebody with a New York driver's license shows up, bails them out cash, and then they're never seen again. They're not going to go to their court hearings. So it seems like not only are our police departments underfunded and under-equipped to deal with the threat of transnational organized crime, but also our criminal justice system is as well. And there was an attempt in the state legislature to try to give Maine a little RICO law, some new tools to crack down on the problem. The Attorney General's office testified against it. I'm just wondering, what more do you think could be done at the state level to take charge of this issue?
Well, generally, I try not to opine on what the legislature should do, but I will quote what Christopher Wray, the FBI director, said to me. And he essentially said that when these grow houses are disrupted, on those rare cases when they're able to catch someone there, that in states that have legalized marijuana, it's a slap on the wrist. Yeah. That was his term. So it's low risk to them. So I think that an action that could be taken is to greatly increase the penalties for these illegal growing operations.
I want to circle back to something you said about the U.S. attorney and her comment that she's seen no evidence of human trafficking. I found that curious because I read the affidavits that attended the federal indictment of Shishen Guo, who was found in Pasadumkeag. He's the only one who's been indicted federally. And in that affidavit, one of the individuals who was present but not arrested said he was picked up off the street in New York and brought to Pasadumkeag against his will and didn't want to be there. So it seems to me that if she was familiar with any of these, it would be most of all the federal indictment. And it seems like if an elderly man is brought to Pasadumkeag, Maine against their will from New York City, kind of sounds like human trafficking to me.
It certainly does. It sounds like forced labor. Plus, I remember reading in another indictment where the person said that he had no money for the bail.
Yeah.
And if they're being paid, then why did he have no money to be able to get bail or to post a bond? It's also, again, I go back to the conditions in these homes. Why would anyone work in obviously an extremely unhealthy environment when at a fast food restaurant, at a retail store, they're double the federal minimum wage. They're above Maine's minimum wage. So it doesn't make sense to me. And in talking to people in Oklahoma and California, they are convinced that there is human trafficking. Again, I can't prove it, but if an older American was forced against his will to come to Maine, that seems to me to be the veritable definition.
I mean, we're working for $10,000 or $12,000 a year. I mean, it might not. I guess the way I've talked about it is, if you're in Kingman, Maine, and you're an hour and a half away from the nearest grocery store, and you don't have a car and you don't speak English, you might not be in chains, and there might not be someone standing over your shoulder forcing you to work, but you're not essentially free.
And you're completely dependent. And I know at least one of these unhealthy grow houses had a broken down cot in it. Yeah. So someone was living there. Who would choose to live there?
Yeah. So we've seen, based on our reporting, we've connected at least one restaurant not too far away from where we are. The owner has been involved with connecting the electricity for more than 35 illicit grows. I guess I'm surprised that something hasn't been done about that based on the fact pattern that we laid out. But do you see any overlap between what appear to be legitimate businesses operating in Maine and some of the criminal operators?
I think that's an unusual case, but I too was stunned by it. And the individual, the restaurant owner who got an electrician to help him with the work, an older man to help him, the older individual was very blunt about what he had been doing.
Almost like he's pre-Alzheimer's.
Well, I did wonder about his cognitive health and whether he was being exploited, because it certainly sounded that way to me. But again, I don't know all the facts of the case, but it certainly did sound that way. And the other aspect here is I know that at least one of the electric companies in Maine is willing to cooperate with federal officials. And when there's a huge spike, and it is an enormous spike.
It's enough to smelt aluminum.
Exactly.
We're not talking about just running your air conditioner
Correct.
too much during the summer.
Correct. It's an enormous increase in electricity use. That's a pretty good indicator that something is going on and would help law enforcement pinpoint where they should get the search warrant.
And interestingly enough, it was Republicans in the state legislature who opposed that provision because they were worried about spying or surveillance.
See, I was sure that it would be raised as a privacy issue, but we're not talking about anything that resembles a normal pattern, and there would still be a requirement for a search warrant. So there's not a check in the system.
So most of the sites that I've visited in the interviews I've conducted with the people who operate them, and most of what you can glean from search warrants that have been executed, it seems like you have a lot of the elderly people who are, maybe they're against their will or on unsavory conditions, but at some of the locations, specifically in the Auburn-Lewiston area and definitely in Greenbush, Maine, the sites seem more militarized. And I've heard stories from HVAC electrical workers who attend those sites of dozens of military-age males, close crop hair, fatigues, quickly ushering them off the sites, monitoring them, bribing them in some cases, $200 of coffee money to get them off their property. It seems like that's more than just a money-making opportunity. Are you worried about a CCP fifth column operating in Maine and in the U.S.?
I'm not sure whether it's a military effort or a surveillance effort. And that's one reason that I want to have an intelligence briefing from our, not only the FBI, but our intelligence community to find out if they're even focused on this issue. And because there is an effort underway to ban Chinese purchases of land that is adjacent to sensitive military sites. But, even if it's not a nuclear military site, you can still pick up a lot of surveillance and intelligence information that we would not want our enemies to have.
So I talk with a lot of my friends from Dexter growing up who are right in the middle of many of these locations. And there seems to be this kind of general sense of pessimism amongst people my age and younger. No one expects to collect Social Security. They look around and they see people breaking the rules and suffering no consequences. It seems like in our lifetime, things have just gotten crappier. I guess from your position in Washington and as a senator from Maine, why do you think that is? Why is there this pervasive sense of, I guess, pessimism and a sense that, the laws only apply maybe to the little people, to the people who are trying to just pay taxes, work, raise a family?
That concerns me greatly. And because I view your generation and the generation behind you as the hope of our nation to get us back on track. We are not in a good place right now in America. I spoke to high school students just recently at the University of Maine who are here for a week leadership conference. I spoke to Dirigo Boys and Girls State just recently as well. I look for every opportunity to speak to young people, to encourage them to get involved, to not be overly pessimistic about their future, but we need to rebuild a sense of trust and community in this country. And I see the divisiveness at every level of society, in families, communities, state, country. And I think that reflects government at almost all levels, but I also think government at all levels is reflecting society. It's reinforcing one another. So I want people to know that many of us are working together, that we do care, and that we want a better life for them. And one of the problems when we don't see law enforcement work together in a constructive way to confront a crisis like this is it does discourage people, and it makes them wonder, why aren't you protecting me and my family? And that's a legitimate question, and that's why I'm going to continue to bring up this issue over and over again. I do believe my constant, incessant inquiries and public settings, as well as through letters, has made a difference, and but much more needs to be done. And again, I am so grateful to our sheriffs and local law enforcement for working so hard. I think the state police are starting to play a greater role, as is the FBI, DHS, DEA, and ironically, the IRS, because believe me, taxes are not being paid.
That's how they got Capone.
You're actually right. That is absolutely correct. So I think we need everybody's involvement at all levels of law enforcement. I'm also trying to educate my colleagues more about this. Most of them, with the exception of California and Oklahoma, I've found are not familiar with this. So the good news is that Maine is actually ahead due to a lot of the work that you have done in cracking down on these illegal criminal grow houses.
Well, we've shared the same struggle trying to convince people. No, I'm telling you, Chinese mafia is in Maine. So I guess my last question, we haven't reported on this, but by the time this comes out, we will have. Multiple law enforcement sources have told us about burglaries that are happening in the Bangor Brewer area, Lewiston, Auburn, even around Brunswick, Portland, not targeting areas where drugs are being grown or trafficked, but cash stashes, areas where money is being kept. And there was one of these properties in Brewer. They called the police 7 days after they were robbed for $65,000. Oh. And in northern Maine, they think that it's different Chinese mafia organizations knocking off places that they know are going to be soft targets. But in southern Maine, they think that it's some of the cartels knocking off Chinese mafia. And you don't have to be a FBI agent or a super spy to understand that when you have that kind of activity going on, it doesn't take long before violence breaks out. So I guess is that a concern of yours that potentially this bleeds out and becomes less of they're ruining our houses and selling poisonous weed, but more of a violent problem that really is a threat to the people of Maine? And then what should our response be if that does happen?
It is a threat to the safety and well-being of the people of Maine. And proof of that is the violence that has occurred in Oklahoma. Yeah. There are actual cases with these grow houses where there has been violence. So I am concerned about the rising crime rate in our state last year, particularly in the Portland area. I'm also concerned about the disrespect for our police in Portland. I've talked to police officers who have recounted to me that for 2 years in a row during the 4th of July, they have had fireworks thrown at them, at the police. And in one case, they were trying to help an individual who had been injured. That is just unacceptable. And it's one reason why you see vacancies in police departments such as Portland, which in turn overworks the police force. But that's a real change, and I don't understand it.
Well, thank you very much, Senator, for giving us some of your time. And I appreciate your advocacy on this issue as someone who has a personal health interest in seeing the Chinese mafia kicked out of Maine.
Thank you so much. And again, I appreciate your groundbreaking investigative reporting. I don't think we would be nearly as aware of this, but for the work you've done.
Well, thank you very much.